Hello, and thanks for joining us in English for Philosophy Students. We're doing the book 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. We are in our 39th lesson of that book, and in our eighth lesson of chapter 5, which says, "Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them." Excuse me. Let us begin reading. We are at the bottom of this page. Let me get what I need. Skinner, B.F. Skinner, knew that threats and punishments could stop, could stop threats and punishments could stop unwanted behaviors, just as reward reinforces what is desirable. In a world paralyzed at the thought of interfering with the hypothetically pristine path of natural child development, it can be difficult even to discuss the former techniques. However, children would not have such a lengthy period of natural development prior to maturity. I just want to make a mark here, just a sec. Prior to maturity, if their behavior did not have to be shaped. They would just leap out of the womb, ready to trade stocks. Children also, hold on one sec. Children also cannot be fully sheltered from fear and pain. They're small and vulnerable. They don't know much about the world. Even when they are doing something as natural as learning to walk, they're constantly being walloped by the world. And this is to say nothing of the frustration and rejection they inevitably experience when dealing with siblings and peers and uncooperative, stubborn adults. Given this, the fundamental moral question is not how to shelter children completely from misadventure and failure so they never experience any fear or pain, but how to maximize their learning so that useful knowledge may be gained with minimal cost. Now, I have said before that it is very important to understand the structure of a paragraph and the structure of an argument in order to understand what is being said. This particular paragraph, I spent a little bit of time taking apart, analyzing. So let us look at this paragraph from the beginning. Skinner knew that threats and punishments, in other words, negative discipline, threats, saying, "I'm going to spank you," and actual punishments where you spank them, negative interaction with children, punishments, threats and punishment could stop unwanted behaviors, just as reward reinforces what is desirable. Remember, in former lessons, Jordan Peterson told us that people want to train their children only using positive means. Really, they don't want to train their children at all. because they think they have been taught that a child is born perfect, and it is society that ruins them. So people are afraid to train their children. But if they train them at all, it is only with positive means, rewards. But here, he says, punishments can get rid of unwanted behavior. So punishment is effective in changing the behavior of a child. It is just as effective as reward. So you have two methods, negative and positive. Then he says, in a world paralyzed at the thought of interfering with the hypothetically pristine path of natural child development, it can be difficult even to discuss the former techniques. Former means we have punishment and rewards. Former is the first, punishment. Latter is the second, rewards. So the former is punishment. In our world, people are paralyzed. They cannot act when they are thinking of messing with a perfect child. So in that world, we don't even want to discuss punishments. However, and here is our, however, and now he is going to go into 3 details which will support his thesis. His thesis is given down here. This is the full thesis. But let's look at the 3 pieces of support first. I will give a different color for each. Children would not have such a lengthy period of natural development prior to maturity if their behavior did not have to be shaped. They would just leap out of the womb ready to trade stocks. So, the first piece of support is that human beings have a lengthy period of natural development prior to maturity. When we are babies, we are dependent, and we do not become fully independent for maybe 15 or more years. This fact suggests that there is a learning process that must go on from babyhood to maturity to mold us into independent adults. So number 1 is an argument from nature. We have a long childhood. It's likely we are not born perfect. All right, let's get a second color. Children also cannot be fully sheltered from fear of pain. So it is literally impossible to shelter children from fear and pain. So we say we should not punish them or say no to them because we are trying to shelter them from fear and pain. But the truth is, it is not possible to fully shelter a child because children are small and vulnerable, and no matter what they do, they will constantly encounter difficulty. So, second reason why using punishments is okay is because it is not possible to shelter children. So why try? And then the third one, we'll do this color. And this is to say nothing of the frustration and rejection they inevitably experience when dealing with siblings and peers and uncooperative, stubborn adults. So the third reason why it is not necessary to withhold yourself from punishing is the child experiences negative feedback all the time. He is used to it. You are not really protecting him by withholding, only your training as a parent. So, considering these three reasons, he says, given this, let's go back to black, given this, that means in light of these three facts, the fundamental moral question is not how to shelter children completely from misadventure and failure. Misadventure means negative experiences and failure, so that they never experience fear or pain. That is not the question. The question is how to maximize the learning that comes from misadventure and failure and pain. How to maximize the learning so that useful knowledge may be gained with minimal cost. So, given the fact that, number one, children require a great deal of learning before they mature. Two, it's not possible to shelter them. They're going to have pain and frustration. And three, again, they will have a great deal of negative feedback from the world anyway. In light of all that, the correct question is not whether to punish or only reward. The correct question is how to train a child in order to help them grow and learn in the best way with the least amount of frustration from peers and from other, like getting hit by a car or something in the world. So that is that paragraph. Let us move on to the next paragraph. In the Disney movie Sleeping Beauty, the king and queen have a daughter, the Princess Aurora, after a long wait. They plan a great christening to introduce her to the world. They welcome everyone who loves and honors their new daughter, but they fail to invite Maleficent, a name which means malicious and malevolent. So they fail to invite Maleficent, who is essentially queen of the underworld, or nature in her negative guise. So the Sleeping Beauty is one of these archetypical tales that embody deep truth, even though they are mythological in that they never actually occurred, literally. Okay, so this means, symbolically, that the two monarchs are overprotecting their beloved daughter by setting up a world around her that has nothing negative in it. This is a picture of what parents are doing on a wide scale today. Not only parents, but schools and society in general. But this does not protect her. It makes her weak. Maleficent curses the princess, sentencing her to death at the age of 16, caused by the prick of a spinning wheel's needle. The spinning wheel is the wheel of fate. The prick, which produces blood, symbolizes the loss of virginity, a sign of the emergence of the woman from the child. So this is a simple narrative with Jordan Peterson's interpretation of the elements of the story, connecting them to ultimate reality. Let us continue the story. Fortunately, a good fairy, the positive element of nature, reduces the punishment to unconsciousness, redeemable with love's first kiss. The panicked king and queen get rid of all the spinning wheels in the land. How stupid. How will they spin fabric for clothing? And turn their daughter over to the much too nice good fairies. Turn over means give her to them. Give control of the child. They put the child in the care of 3 good fairies to raise her in protection. That's what happens in the story. So anyway. So they turn their daughter over to the much too nice good fairies, of whom there are 3. They continue with their strategy of removing all dangerous things, but in doing so, they leave their daughter naive, immature, and weak. One day, just before Aurora's 16th birthday, she meets a prince in the forest and falls in love the same day. By any reasonable standard, that's a bit much. This is Jordan saying, really, it's a ridiculous story. That will not happen. Then she loudly bemoans the fact that she is to be wed to Prince Philip, to whom she was betrothed as a child, and she collapses emotionally when she is brought back to her parents' castle for her birthday. So when she was a baby, she was promised in marriage to Prince Philip. Now, at 16, she has met a stranger in the woods, and she doesn't want to marry him. I mean, she wants to marry him, not Philip. In the Disney version, the stranger is Philip. Anyway, so she has a fit and faints and is so sad. She's weak. All right. Excuse. It is at that moment that Maleficent's curse manifests itself. A portal opens up in the castle, a spinning wheel appears, and Aurora pricks her finger and falls unconscious. She becomes Sleeping Beauty. In doing so, again symbolically speaking, she chooses unconsciousness over the terrors of adult life. Something existentially similar to this occurs very frequently with overprotected children who can be brought low and then desire the bliss of unconsciousness by their first real contact with failure, or worse, genuine malevolence, which they do not or will not understand and against which they have no defense. So he is saying that when you have a child who is overprotected and then they encounter difficulty, they will turn away and retreat from the world because they are not equipped to deal with the normal problems of life. Next paragraph. Take the case of the 3-year-old. Okay, so this phrase, take the case of, tells us that this paragraph is an example of the point he has made before. The point he made before is that the overprotected child is not equipped to meet the difficulties of the world. Now he's going to give an example. So he says, take the case of the 3-year-old who has not learned to share toys. She displays her selfish behavior in the presence of her parents, but they are too nice to intervene. More truthfully, they refuse to pay attention. So they're not really too nice to intervene. Actually, they're refusing to do anything because they don't know what to do, or they don't believe that you should do anything. I experienced this when my daughter was a small child, maybe 1 year old. We spent a week on a vacation with a family that had a 2-year-old child. Anytime my daughter would go and pick up a toy, the 2-year-old would come and take it away. Oh, I dropped my pen. So the 2-year-old would take it away. Then, when my daughter would go and pick up a different toy, the 2-year-old would drop the first toy, go over and take away the next one. The mother and I were watching this, and I looked to the mother to do something about her daughter. And the mother just sort of laughed nervously and said, "She is becoming territorial." And she did not intervene. She excused the fact that her daughter refused to share and did not intervene. When my grandchildren are trying to share a toy and having difficulty, what we do is we teach them what to say as a formula. For example, if one child is playing with a toy and the other comes and wants to play with that same toy, the first thing the child naturally does is try to take the toy. Then the other child says no. And then the first child looks to me and says, "He won't give me that toy." And so then I have a chance to train. So I speak to the one with the toy and I say, "You should say, 'I will give you a turn in 2 minutes.'" So the child says, "I will give you a turn in 2 minutes." And the first child is happy. And she just sits and waits. And in 2 minutes or a few minutes, the first child says, "Your turn," and hands it over. So we have taught that. Now, sometimes the child will, instead of saying 2 minutes, he'll say, "You can have it tomorrow." And then the first child will say, "He won't give me the toy." And I say to the first child, "It should be sooner than tomorrow." So I teach them. And also, sometimes it is not appropriate to give the child, and we must teach the second child to say, "Okay," and we teach them to shrug their shoulders, shrug it off, and walk away. "Okay," and walk away and play with something else. So we teach these things very specifically. The children accept them immediately as a formula, and they do it, and problem is solved. And they use these techniques when they're playing with other children in the church or in their homeschool co-op or neighbors. So I think it is good to give a script to teach a child what to do, and their feelings will follow. The same happens when one child hurts another by mistake. The hurt child will say, "He hurt me." And then I will say, "Did he say he was sorry?" And then she'll say, "Yes." "Did you say I forgive you?" And then she says no. And I say, "Well, you need to forgive him." So then she'll say, "I forgive you," and they're fine. Or perhaps the first child did not say he was sorry. Well, he has to, and then the other one must forgive. So we teach it. So anyway, this is the case of a 3-year-old who has not learned to share. She displays her selfish behavior in the presence of her parents, but they are too nice to intervene. By too nice, we mean in the American sense, too amiable. More truthfully, they refuse to pay attention, admit to what is happening, and teach her how to act properly. I'm sorry. They are annoyed, of course, when she won't share with her sister. Usually parents are embarrassed when their child misbehaves because it makes it look like they're a bad parent. But still, they do not intervene and train. It's inconsistent, these feelings they have. So they're annoyed because they are embarrassed that she won't share, but they pretend everything is okay. It is not okay. So they pretend that there are no consequences for the child. But they will snap at her later for something totally unrelated. So later, maybe she will ask for milk, and they'll say, "No, go away, go to bed." Because they're angry with her for not sharing 2 hours earlier. She will be hurt by that and confused, but she will learn nothing. So she will she will have the negative experience, but she will not gain the learning. This happens all the time with parents who try not to punish and try only to use positive methods of training. The children become so outrageous that the parents become so angry that oftentimes the parent will snap and actually become violent toward their children. So it's sad that parents who refuse to use mild punishment in a conscious way end up being abusively violent because of anger. Worse, when she tries to make friends, it won't go well because of her lack of social sophistication. So the first problem is that the parents are annoyed and they're going to snap at her later. The second problem is that when she tries to make friends, it won't go well because of her lack of social skills. These are the bad consequences that come to a child who is not trained. Children of her own age will be put off. That means repelled, repulsed by her inability to cooperate. They will fight with her or wander off and find someone else to play with. I'm so sorry, I have a terrible cough. Children, let's see. The parents of those children will observe her awkwardness and not invite her back to play. So this child will become isolated. She will be lonely and rejected. This will produce anxiety, depression, and resentment. That will produce the turning from life that is equivalent to a wish for unconsciousness. which is about in the story of Sleeping Beauty. And we have many people in the United States in this condition. We have an epidemic of youth suicide in the United States. Loneliness and lack of social ability. Kids who don't want to learn to drive and have a driver's license. They only want to stay alone in their room with their phone or their computer. This is very common in this generation that has been raised with so much wealth and no discipline. Moving on. Parents who refuse to adopt the responsibility for disciplining their children think they can just opt out of the conflict necessary for proper child rearing. So parents think they can opt out. They think they can choose to avoid conflict, the conflict necessary to train a child for proper child rearing. These parents, avoid being the bad guy. Being the bad guy is being a parent who says no when the child will say, "Why not?" The parent who is the bad guy feels bad and doesn't like to be the bad guy in the short term, meaning bad guy today, but beloved parent in the future when the child grows up. Okay, so parents who refuse to adopt the responsibility for disciplining their children think they can just opt out of the conflict necessary for proper child rearing. They avoid being the bad guy in the short term, but they do not at all rescue or protect their children from fear and pain. Quite the contrary, meaning the opposite is true. The judgmental and uncaring broader social world will mete out conflict and punishment far greater than that which would have been delivered by an awake parent. So, parents who are positive claim they are protecting their child from fear and pain. But actually, what they are doing is exposing the child to the judgment of the world, the social world. And it will be far worse, far greater. The punishment will be far greater than what a good, awake parent would have done. You can discipline your children, or you can turn that responsibility over. Remember, the king and queen turned over Aurora to the fairies. You can turn the responsibility over to the harsh, uncaring, judgmental world. And the motivation for the latter decision, i.e., turning your child over to the judgmental world to be trained, should never be confused with love. In other words, there is no excuse for a loving parent to fail to discipline personally. Because if you do not discipline your child personally, the world will do it. But the world will do it in a mean, harsh way. Next paragraph. You might object, so this means a person who has the standard view of the world that you should be positive parents will object to Jordan's ideas, as modern parents sometimes do. You might object, saying, why should a child even be subject to the arbitrary dictates of a parent? In fact, there is a new variant of politically correct thinking that presumes that such an idea is adultism. The idea that parents should be in charge of their children is a form of prejudice and oppression, like the left likes to think of oppression. So, adultism, a form of prejudice and oppression, analogous to, say, sexism or racism. This word say means for example. The question of adult authority must be answered with care. So, in other words, it's a good question. It requires serious consideration. Okay, answered with care. That requires a thorough examination of the question itself. Accepting an objection, remember he said you might object, so this objection, this thing, is the objection. Accepting an objection as formulated, so accepting it as formulated means accepting that this is a reasonable suggestion, is halfway to accepting its validity. And that can be dangerous if the question is ill posed. So he's saying that we need to look at the objection and find out if it is legitimate from the beginning. So let's break it down. So we're going to break down this. First, why should a child be subject? Subject means I have to obey. If I am subject to a law, I must obey it. If I am subject to a person, I must obey him. People are subjects of the king because they must obey. Why should a child be subject? So up here we say, why should a child even be subject? That's the central question. Why should a child have to obey at all? Why should a child be subject? That's easy. Every child must listen to and obey adults because he or she is dependent on the care that one or more imperfect grown-ups is willing to bestow. So because they are dependent, they must be subject. Given this, remember this is that phrase again, considering the truth of the previous assertion, it is better for the child to act in a manner that invites genuine affection and goodwill. So if the child is dependent on the adult, then it is a good idea for the child to please that adult. Something even better might be imagined. The child could act in a manner that simultaneously ensures optimal adult attention in a manner that benefits his or her present state of being and future development. So, the most ideal behavior for a child is a behavior which causes adults to give appropriate attention, which is attention which will be helpful in benefiting the child's future state, present and future state. So ideally, the child should behave in a way that causes adults to invest in the child. That is a very high standard, but it is in the best interest of the child, so there's every reason to aspire to it. It's a high standard that the child should behave in the most appropriate, perfect way, but It's in the best interest of the child, meaning it is good for the child. Therefore, we should try to achieve it using both punishments and rewards. All that we are doing today falls back to that first paragraph. The question of should we use punishment and reward or only reward? Let us continue. Every child should also be taught to comply gracefully with the expectations of civil society. Okay, so also, this is our transition showing us the structure of the paragraph. This one over here is point number 1. Why should a child be subject? Now we're going into point number 2. In addition to being subject to your parents, the child should act in a way so as to please the greater society. So, every child should be taught to comply gracefully. This means obey. Comply is obey. And gracefully means without fuss, with the expectations of civil society. So in church, the society requires that you stand at certain times and sit at certain times. And children should be taught to comply, even if they don't feel like it. Because the greater society has the ability to benefit your child if they like him or her. And if they hate him or her, they will kick him out. So it is in the best interest of the child to be taught to comply gracefully with the demands of civil society. This does not mean crushed into mindless ideological conformity. So it's not extreme. It means instead that parents must reward those attitudes and actions that will bring their child success in the world outside the family, and use threat and punishment when necessary to eliminate behaviors which will lead to misery and failure. I remember when my older daughter was 2 years old, there was a little girl who was 3 years old who lived next door. And one day, and they played together a lot. One day, my little girl came in crying because she said her friend refused to play with her. And the friend had another friend over visiting who was even older. So the 3-year-old wanted to play with the older child, not with my daughter, who was only 2. And I thought about going out there and yelling at the little 3-year-old and telling her she should include my daughter. But I got a phone call from my friend, who is a wise mother, and I told her my problem, and the mother said to me, I think it would be better for you to teach your daughter how to gracefully absorb the temporary rejection of the friend, rather than trying to change the friend to make her always accept your daughter. Because if you go and yell at the child next door, that child will probably be mean to your daughter again later. You cannot, she said, change the world to accommodate your daughter. It is better to teach your daughter to accommodate the world. So I tried to help my daughter to say, okay, I'll play somewhere else today. That was good advice. Let's continue reading. There's a tight window of opportunity for this as well. So getting it right quickly matters. So a tight window of opportunity means you have a chance to do something for a little bit of time and then the opportunity goes away. So take advantage of your chance to teach at the right age, because when the child gets older, you will not be able to teach anymore. So get it right quickly. If a child has not been taught to behave properly by the age of 4, it will forever be difficult for him or her to make friends. That's before they even get to school. They must be taught to share, to forgive, to be kind, to say I'm sorry if they offend, to obey adults gracefully, to not be greedy and selfish and grab the cookies or whatever for themselves. There's a lot to learn. The research literature is quite clear on this. This matters because peers are the primary source of socialization after the age of 4. Rejected children cease to develop. In other words, they stop developing because they're alienated from their peers. So peers are the primary source of socialization, and if you are alienated from your peers, you will not develop. They fall further and further behind. So if they are a little bit behind their peers at the age of 5, at the age of 6, at the age of 7, at the age of 8, they are further and further behind socially. They are not skilled socially, and there is more difference as time goes by, as the other children continue to progress. Thus, the friendless child too often becomes the lonely, antisocial, or depressed teenager and adult. This is not good. When Jordan Peterson says it, he says, this is not good, meaning this is dangerous for you. Much more of our sanity than we commonly realize is a consequence of our fortunate immersion in a social community. So this means our positive immersion in a social community. If you have a good community around you, it will help your mental health a lot. We must be continually reminded to think and act properly. When we drift, people that care for and love us nudge us in small ways. Nudges move you gently a little bit. In small ways and large, back on track. So if you are in a community and you go astray a little bit, you fall into a bad attitude or bad way of thinking, those around you can gently correct you and keep you on a path of blessing. But if you are alone, you could go down, 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 and no one could to help you. So we'd better have some of those people around. Okay, moving on. Let me get another color. It's also, again, we have our transition, not the case. This word means he is still defending a previous idea. What is the previous idea? Let's go back. It was up here. You might object, as modern parents sometimes do. Why should a child even be subject to the arbitrary dictates of parents? And he said, let's break that down. First, why should they be subject? Because they're dependent. And it is good for them to act in a way that brings positive feedback. That was the first analysis. Second analysis, in addition to being subject to parents, they should be subject to civil society. This is also good for them. Also, it is not the case, back to the question we just looked at, that adult dictates are all arbitrary. So, the form of the objection was, why should a child even be subject to the arbitrary dictates of a parent? A, it's good for them to be subject because they're dependent. And then B, not just to parents, but to society. And C, the dictates aren't arbitrary. They're only arbitrary in a dysfunctional, totalitarian state. But in a civilized, open society, most people, the majority of people, abide by a functional social contract aimed at mutual betterment. So the dictates aren't arbitrary. They are part of a mutually beneficial social contract in a civilized society. Or, at least, existence in close proximity without too much violence. At least that is the goal. If not mutual betterment, then at least peace and not violence. Even a system of rules that allows for only that minimum, not too much violence, only that minimum contract is by no means arbitrary. Okay, so even if it's the least lofty goal, the goal of not too much violence, it's still not arbitrary, given the alternatives. Given, remember, means in light of the fact that a violent society would be terrible. That would be the alternative. If a society does not adequately reward productive, pro-social behavior, insists upon distributing resources in a markedly arbitrary, hold on, I just got rid of everything. In a markedly arbitrary and unfair manner, and allows for theft and exploitation, it will not remain conflict-free for long. If its hierarchies are based only, or even primarily, on power, instead of the competence necessary to get important, difficult things done, it will be prone to collapse as well. Even if this is true in simpler form of the hierarchies of chimpanzees, this is even true in simpler form of the hierarchies of chimpanzees, which is an indication of its fundamental biological and non-arbitrary emergent truth. Okay, so the idea is that objection, why should children be subject to the arbitrary demands of their parents, should not be, that objection should not be accepted in that form. For one reason, because the demands of society and of parents are not arbitrary. They are designed to keep the peace. And if they aren't designed to keep the peace, the system's going to fall apart. So, in the vast majority of times, children are being subject to reasonable rules, not arbitrary or abusive oppression. That's the idea. Okay, we're out of time, but I'm frustrated because we're at the very end. I think we're going to finish this, okay? We'll go a little bit over because we are now at the, let me see if I can do this. No, I can't. We're now at the end of the entire structure of argument that we began with an hour ago. 1 hour ago, the question was raised, should we use punishment and reward or only reward? Everything since then has been defending the use of punishment for many, many, many reasons. Jordan Peterson has insisted that it is good and proper and right to use some form of negative coercion to eliminate bad behavior. So now he is going to summarize his argument in the very end. He will restate it. So let's read. Poorly socialized children have terrible lives. Remember about the child who is rejected? This is a terrible thing. That's a reason for training. Thus, it is better to socialize them optimally. Some of this can be done with reward, but not all of it. In other words, reward is insufficient. You must also have punishment. The issue is therefore not whether to punish and to use punishment and threat. The issue is whether to do it consciously and thoughtfully. Remember, he said, if you pretend that you are not doing it, you will come back and do it abusively because of your anger. So the question is not whether to do it, but whether to do it consciously and thoughtfully and carefully. How then should children be disciplined? This is a very difficult question because children and parents differ vastly in their temperaments. Some children are agreeable. They deeply want to please, but pay for that with a tendency to be conflict averse and dependent. Other children are tougher minded and more independent. Those kids want to do what they want, when they want, all the time. They can be challenging, non-compliant, and stubborn. Some children are desperate for rules and structure and are content, even in rigid environments. Other children, with little regard for predictability and routine, are immune to demands for even minimal necessary order. Some are wildly imaginative and creative. Others are concrete and conservative. These are all deeply important differences, heavily influenced by biological factors, and difficult to modify socially. It is fortunate indeed that in the face of such variability, we are the beneficiaries of much thoughtful meditation on the proper use of social control. So he is going to go now. Now he considers that he has finished the question of whether to use force. And the answer is yes, you must use it thoughtfully and carefully. The next question, which we will begin looking at next week, is how to do it in light of the immense variability of the personality of a child and of a parent. So that will be next week. See you later.